right here on X, on YouTube, on Rumble, on Facebook. It is good to see you all. Welcome to the Liz Wheeler Show. I'm your host, Liz Wheeler. I spoke at the Catholic Identity Conference over the weekend in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Pittsburgh reminds me actually of my hometown of Cincinnati. And before I was slated to speak as the keynote speaker on Friday evening, and so I had the day to myself before. And when I say to myself, I wasn't working necessarily. So we took our kids to the Pittsburgh Zoo, which is a great zoo. We had a good time there. But I got a call while I was at the zoo from Glenn Beck's people, from his team at his radio show. And they said, "Hey, Liz, I know this is last second, but can you come on the show this morning in, 30 minutes, T-minus 30 minutes to talk about the Pope?" Because guys probably saw the videos of Pope Leo blessing the ice. He took part in some really weird so-called quote unquote climate justice thing. It was radical environmentalism, which of course is a thin mask over communism. And it was weird, and it appeared to be scandalous. I did not like to see the Pope doing that. My full thoughts, you can go and watch my conversation with Glenn Beck about it. I think he posted it on his X account because I did go on his show. But I had my kids at the zoo right when Glenn Beck's team asked me to do this hit. And of course it's Glenn. Of course I'm going to say yes. I'm happy to. But I said, I'm at the zoo with my kids. Is that okay? And they're like, yeah, just find a quiet spot. And I'm like, okay, sure. Wasn't that busy of a day at the zoo. So when the time comes for me to go on Glenn's show, I, take my phone and put my AirPod in to put noise cancellation on, and I walk off the path. You can picture what a path at the zoo looks like. It's a little paved, it's wider than a sidewalk, little paved roads. And off to one side of the road, there was, I would call it like a pseudo amphitheater. It wasn't like a real venue. Those of you who've been to the Pittsburgh Zoo, it's like a mid-level zoo. It's like halfway between like the Dallas Zoo or the San Diego Zoo or the Cincinnati Zoo and Joe Exotic Zoo. It's like it's mid-level. So it's like put together, but it's not like ostentatious or anything. So this amphitheater where I assume they have live presentations with animals, it's not a real amphitheater. It's like a bunch of bales of hay basically off to the side of the paved pathway. And there's a little sidewalk that gets to the amphitheater. Well, there was a sign next to on the pathway right next to this amphitheater that said no live shows today. There was no closed sign, no sign that said please do not enter. It was just a couple of benches basically right next to the pathway. So that's where I walk when it's time for me to go on Glenn Beck's show, because there were zoo carts coming by on the paved roads. It was kind of loud. I just walked like 2 or 3 yards off of the paved path, and I'm talking to Glenn, and I'm getting really into it because he's asking me, is it demoralizing to see the leader of the Catholic Church engaging in quote unquote climate justice activities, which again is a thin mask over communism. So I'm getting really into it, and I'm talking about spirituality, and I'm talking about God, and I'm talking about communism and how it contradicts natural order, and I'm talking about radical environmentalism and how that's different than how we're called as Christians to be good stewards of God's creation. And you know me, I'm getting passionate. I'm getting probably just a little bit loud. And there's a few people that walk by in the path who kind of look at me like, why is this girl ranting on the phone? And then a zookeeper walks by. And just for context, what this zookeeper looked like. The zookeeper was a young man, probably in his 20s. He had extremely long hair, like long straight hair. Like, you know what Scott Pressler's hair looks like? It's like Scott Pressler style hair, except this guy also had this like very sharp and triangular looking goatee, full zookeeper garb on. And he walks up the path and looks at me, again, ranting about God and communism and radical environmentalism at the zoo. And he stops and he just like stares at me. And then he goes, "Excuse me." And I kind of like nod and smile at him because I'm in the middle of, well, what he doesn't know is a national radio hit. But just in the way that's like, I'm not going to talk to you right now, but thank you for saying excuse me. He goes, "Excuse me." And I'm like, and then he goes, "Do you work here?" And I just kind of hold up my hand like, "Oh, I'll be with you in a moment, but don't interrupt me." And he goes, "If you don't work here, you need to move along." And again, I wasn't behind any signs. I wasn't violating any rules. I wasn't in a restricted or prohibited area. He just stood there and heard me in the middle of the Pittsburgh Zoo talking about communism and how radical environmentalism is actually a mask over this Marxist ideology that, because we were talking about the Pope, I was like, listen, the communist ideology, you can look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, comes straight from the bowels of hell, in the middle of the zoo. And the zookeeper was, I don't want to say a stereotypical zookeeper, but he was a stereotypical zookeeper, and he shooed me along because I was talking about communism right across from the cages of the lions. Anyway, we did some digging here on the Liz Wheeler Show into the judge. We've hypothetically in the conservative movement talked a lot about judges recently, and I think we need to do more than just talk about these judges. We can't just say, wow, this judge is a judicial activist. This judge is issuing a ruling that violates their constitutional oath. Actually, we have recourse to get rid of these judges, and I want to talk about that today because we here at the Liz Wheeler Show did some digging into the particular judge that let the would-be assassin, the transgender would-be assassin who tried to kill Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, that sentencing happened over the weekend. And the judge that let Kavanaugh's transgender would-be assassin off easy, this person, for trying to kill Kavanaugh, got only 8 years in prison. We did some digging into who this judge actually is, and you're going to be interested in what we found. It's always exactly what you would expect. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by All Family Pharmacy. Let's be honest, most big chain pharmacies don't care about you or your medical freedom. They just want you to get in line, take their shot, and move on. The experience is not personal at all, and you don't feel like you have any autonomy over that experience. All I want when I need a medication is to be able to get it. It's that simple. I don't want gatekeepers and barriers and people telling me what I should be getting instead. Like, here, yes, I'll tell you your prescriptions, and also let me harass you to get the flu vaccine. I hate all that. It's why I'm proud to partner with All Family Pharmacy. All Family Pharmacy does things differently than what I call the big med pharmacies. They believe that your health decisions should stay between you and your doctor, not dictated by some government agency or an insurance company. So check this out. This is how it works. You pull up their website, allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, search the medication that you want and need. They have over 200 options. You place your order. A doctor then reviews your order, writes you a prescription, and it's shipped straight to your door. That's it. Literally, that's all there is to it. The gatekeeping that has overtaken our healthcare system is outrageous. No, it shouldn't be Dr. Fauci or Albert Bourla or the American Medical Association or your insurance company who decides what medication works for you and whether or not you should get access to it. You should decide. That's what medical freedom means. That's why All Family Pharmacy exists. Go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. Use code Liz10 for 10% off. All Family Pharmacy makes it simple, fast, reliable to get the medications your family needs. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, promo code Liz10. Okay, so this happened several years ago, and it's funny because at the time that this happened, when Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was targeted for assassination, I don't think that I personally realized at the time what a close call it actually was. And mea culpa on me for not realizing this. You can blame it on the mainstream media, I suppose, because the mainstream media essentially buried this story. And I have an example of this. The New York Times, immediately after this would-be assassin was arrested, thank God, before he had a chance to kill Justice Brett Kavanaugh. This is where they placed it on their front page. We can bring this up on the screen here. This is how they buried their story. And they were not an anomaly. The mainstream media in general hid the story. So way down at the bottom of the page, you can see arrest near home of justice. Well, that's a headline that you read and you don't think about it. It's in one ear and out the other. Arrest near home of justice. Okay, how about assassin tries to kill Supreme Court justice? Or would-be assassin nabbed before murdering the justice that he traveled to kill? I mean, this headline is intended for you to pass over it without even reading it. And it was buried in this tiny little article at the very bottom of the page. Again, this is the New York Times. Mainstream media, as a rule, downplayed and belittled this story the best they could because they didn't want you to think about the implications of this. So sometimes the propagandizing by the mainstream media, unfortunately, quite tragically, is effective. And like I said, I didn't realize at the time what a close call this was because there are a lot of crazies who say a lot of crazy things online, right? And back then, when crazy people said crazy things online, you didn't automatically assume that these people were anything other than lunatics who were spouting what's not okay, not acceptable, and mostly not legal to say, issuing these threats. But in order for a threat to be credible, the person has to have the means and the motive. And there are a lot of crazy people who might have hateful ideology, but they don't really have the capability of pulling that off. At least that's what I thought back then. And so at the time when Brett Kavanaugh was targeted for assassination because of his pro-life stance, he, of course, was part of the panel of Supreme Court justices, the majority that overturned Roe v. Wade. I didn't realize at the time how close Brett Kavanaugh came to being killed by this radical leftist, this man named Nicholas Roske. Now, fast forward several years, and Nicholas Roske was finally sentenced, obviously having been convicted of trying to assassinate Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Nicholas Roske was sentenced to just 8 years in prison for this crime. Now, if you actually read some of these mainstream media stories, and this is how you know that the mainstream media is just propagating such evil, they actually report quite heavily on the details of this plot against Brett Kavanaugh. They talk about the weapons that Nicholas Roske brought along, the premeditated planning that went into this assassination attempt. This was not some random person who lost their head in the moment and tried to punch out Brett Kavanaugh, as bad as that would be. This was like a very premeditated crime that almost was successful. And the mainstream media included details that showed how almost successful and how premeditated and how motivated by leftist ideology this crime was. And yet, even though they included that in their articles, they headlined it as nothing. Just this passing arrest happened near the home of a Supreme Court justice. It could have been an arrest at the gas station down the street, for all you know, based on the keywords they deliberately neglected to include in their headline. Nicholas Roske deliberately, in a premeditated manner, targeted for assassination a Supreme Court justice, Brett Kavanaugh, because of Brett Kavanaugh's pro-life views. And yet, 8 years is the entirety of the sentence that Nicholas Roske has to serve in prison with a lifetime of supervised release. Why? Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why that is. It's because Nicholas Roske now identifies as a woman. Nicholas Roske now identifies as transgender. Nicholas Roske, a biological man, has requested to be called Sophie. We, on the Liz Wheeler Show, will not be honoring that request. Nicholas Roske, who identifies as a transgender woman and wants to be called Sophie and asks to be referred to by she, her pronouns, another request that is denied by this show, was sentenced to 8 years because he is transgender. I am not exaggerating. I am not speaking hyperbolically. I am echoing the words of the judge herself who sentenced him. This judge is named Deborah Boardman. She is a district judge in the District of Maryland. You can see a picture of her on the screen. She's a middle-aged woman. She looks a lot like the women who attend the No Kings rallies. Same demographic, same ideology, we have come to find on the Liz Wheeler Show. She looks kind of like the Phillies Karen. You know, the Phillies Karen that excoriated the young man who, the child, he was hardly even a young man, the young boy who had caught the ball that she wanted, and then the father of the young boy gave angry bully Phillies Karen the ball. This judge looks a lot like her. She also actually kind of looks like the doppelganger of the author of White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo. White Fragility, of course, is the book that kind of made critical race theory go mainstream in the United States, or at least introduced critical race theory to white middle-aged women. This is Judge Deborah Boardman. This is what she looks like. She's the one who sentenced the transgender would-be assassin of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, Nicholas Roske, to 97 months in prison and a lifetime of supervised release. Now, your reaction is probably the same as my reaction. The reaction of any common sense individual in this country is to be outraged. Is this justice? Is this fair? Are you seriously trying to tell me that 8 years is all? That's it? That's the whole prison sentence. So if you try to assassinate a Supreme Court justice, you get 8 years. That could almost be described as a slap on the wrist. Thank goodness Attorney General Pam Bondi said the Justice Department would be appealing Roske's prison sentence. Bondi called it woefully insufficient. She is correct on that. But I want to just highlight something. Enrico Terrio was a J6er who wasn't even there at the Capitol on January 6th. And he was sentenced to 22 years in prison for it. Again, he committed no violence. He violated no firearms law. He wasn't even there on January 6th, and yet he was sentenced to 22 years in prison for it. Now, compare that with this transgender individual, this biological man who was identifying as a woman, who tried to assassinate Justice Kavanaugh for Kavanaugh's pro-life ruling in Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health, sentenced to 8 years. Listen, don't worry. In case you think that that's injustice, the judge, Deborah Boardman, in the Kavanaugh case, says she hopes that this trial, the process, helped the would-be assassin's family accept him as their transgender daughter. And you thought there wasn't a silver lining to this. And Judge Boardman made the would-be assassin's sentence as light as she did, a mere 8 years, for a very valid reason. Because President Trump won't incarcerate the man in a woman's prison. The judge is worried about his safety if he, as a man, is in a male prison. No worry, though, about the women in the women's prisons if a biological man is incarcerated with them. Don't worry about their vulnerability to assault, especially sexual assault. She's worried about his safety, so she reduced his sentence because she doesn't like President Trump. Okay. In case anyone wonders why all of us on the right, most of us in the center, and some on the left are all Stephen Miller about crime now. This is why. Because the left is quite literally what this judge did. It's not just an isolated, narrow ruling that's unfair or unjust. What she did is she legalized left-wing terrorism. So now people on the left who are committing acts of violence against us, which is happening on a daily basis right now, now she has signaled to them that as long as you have openly embraced a communist ideology, the neo-Marxist ideology of queer theory, as long as you identify as transgender, then you will be held to a different standard. You will get a lighter sentence. You will be actually rewarded by our justice system if you commit violence in the name of radical leftist ideology, as long as you have put on the mantle of transgenderism. She has legalized left-wing terrorism. How many leftists in our country today do you think are saying, well, geez, so next time I throw a brick at a cop, all I have to do before the judge is be like, please call me she, her, and you'll get let out of prison. And by the way, this just brought up again. It's just a reminder how bananas it is that the FBI has not released the name of the person who leaked the Supreme Court ruling on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which was the ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade. Remember that? Somebody within the Supreme Court, and this is a very limited number of people who would have had access to that ruling prior to its official publication, a very small number. Like, they know who did it. And yet they tell us they just can't figure it out. They just don't know. They just don't want, I don't know, they don't want that person to be vilified. It's just a reminder that not only are they lying to us because they think they can get away with lying to us and protecting the person who leaked that, but the leaking of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health wasn't just because that person was mad. It wasn't just because the person was probably a clerk at the Supreme Court, right? It wasn't just because an employee of the Supreme Court thought you should know a couple of weeks, a month, 2 months before the actual ruling was issued. The reason that the leaker leaked Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health was to spark violence against the Supreme Court justices who had signed on to that majority opinion. And so circling back to the beginning, I may not have realized at the time just what a close call it was, what a near miss this attempted assassination of Brett Kavanaugh was. And shame on me for not recognizing that at the time. But what I can recognize for a fact right now is that we need to know the name of the person who leaked that opinion. And I understand actually that the Trump administration probably doesn't want to bring it back up because they don't like to talk about abortion because it's a divisive topic among Trump's base because some of us are more pro-life personally than President Trump. People like me recognize that despite that, President Trump is still the most pro-life president that we've ever had in this country, and I greatly appreciate that. But it's true that personally and politically, I'm more pro-life than Trump. They don't like to talk about abortion because it becomes a divisive issue, not just right versus left, but even among the right. I don't care. we have got to find out who leaked that Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health majority opinion, because it led directly to the very close call, the assassination attempt against Brett Kavanaugh. There's simply no argument that the assassination attempt followed that because of that. No argument. So now let's get to this judge. We did some digging on this judge because when I was reading these comments that she made, that she hopes, if anything, with sympathy towards the would-be assassin, that she hopes his family throughout this process has come to accept him as their transgender daughter. I was like, what kind of disgusting thing are you? Like, what are you even saying right now? Who are you and how did you get into this position? And so I did some digging. My team did some digging on Judge Deborah Boardman, and I'm going to tell you what we found in just a moment. First, I want to talk to you about one of the partners for today's episode. That would be MASA chips. You guys know I love MASA chips. There was a time when all chips and fries were cooked in beef tallow. But sometime in the 1990s, during my childhood, the big corporations swapped it out for seed oils. Well, because they're cheaper, right? And now those seed oils, which are unhealthy, make up about 20% of the average American's daily calories. It's a huge problem in our country because seed oils have been linked to inflammation and metabolic issues, which is one of the roots of our chronic disease epidemic in our country. Well, MASA decided to address this, to fix that. They created an incredible tortilla chip made with just 3 ingredients: organic, nixtamalized corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. No seed oils, no junk, just flavor. Honestly, they did an amazing job. The taste is amazing. MASA chips are thicker, they're crunchier, they're sturdier than anything else out there. They won't break in your guac. They won't feel bloated or sluggish afterward. The tallow makes them more than filling too, so you actually feel satisfied instead of feeling guilty. And I say this as someone who's openly addicted to chips. You know this. It is what it is. So are you ready to give MASA a try? I highly recommend you do. Go to masachips.com/Liz Wheeler and use code Liz Wheeler for 25% off your first order. That's a good deal. You don't want to pass that up if you're a chip lover like me. That's masachips.com/Liz Wheeler and code Liz Wheeler for 25% off your first order. Don't feel like ordering online? That's okay. MASA is now available nationwide at your local Sprouts supermarket. Stop by and pick up a bag before they're gone. masachips.com/Liz Wheeler, code Liz Wheeler. Okay, let's talk about Judge Deborah Boardman. Now, you might remember her or recognize her name at the very least because she's not new to being in the news. This is not the first time she has revealed herself to be a radical leftist who is leveraging her position of power, abusing her position of power, I would call it, on the bench in order to push her own ideological agenda. In February of 2025, it was Judge Boardman who issued the injunction against President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. We talked about that at the time, so I know you're familiar with that abuse of power. These federal injunctions, this judge doesn't even have the authority to do that. Inferior court judges, which means any judge that's underneath the Supreme Court, does not have the authority to issue a nationwide injunction. They can rule only on what is narrowly in front of them. It doesn't even take a lawyer to understand that. So when these judges issue nationwide injunctions, you can be sure they're doing so with an ideological goal in mind. In 2023, she also denied a preliminary injunction on parental opt-outs for LGBTQ books in school. You know, the books that contain porn and gay stuff in school. Yeah, she didn't want parents to be able to opt their children out of that. She said, no, parents had no right to do that. And the Supreme Court smacked her down and said, actually, yeah, parents do have a right to do that. This is Judge Deborah Boardman. 2 cases. You are probably already familiar with her work, even if you had not yet associated her name with that work. Suffice to say, she's a leftist, and that's quite obvious, which I would argue should be disqualifying in and of itself. She should not be serving as a district judge if she is a radical leftist, because it's one thing to claim to be impartial on the bench. That basically means don't practice favoritism. If your family or your friend comes before you, you're not supposed to give them a lighter sentence. You are supposed to not pass sentences based on what someone looks like or any other immutable characteristic. That's what it means to be impartial on the bench. What it does not mean is that you should not be allowed to sit on the bench if you have views that are fundamentally at odds with the criminal justice system of our country. If you do not share the values of our American Constitution, then you cannot be a neutral arbiter of the justice called for in our Constitution. Radical leftists should not be federal judges, period. I don't care if this sounds controversial. It seems obvious. We would not import, for example, a radical Islamist who thinks we're all infidels, thinks that America should be absolutely obliterated as the great Satan. We wouldn't say, well, as long as you keep those opinions to yourself, we're going to let you act as a neutral arbiter of justice as long as you promise that you'll be impartial. No, that's insane. We would never do that. Well, that's the same with leftism. Mainstream leftism is not just, oh, you're kind of left of center. You're a Democrat who's a little bit of a bleeding heart leftist, kind of dumb and naive in your policies. No, leftism now, mainstream leftism, is communism. Communism is against Western civilization, is against every value that America is built on, including Christianity. Deborah Boardman is a leftist. She donated to Hillary Clinton in 2007. She donated again to Barack Obama in 2008. But here's the strange part of Deborah Boardman's background. It's not just that she's a leftist. That part's pretty obvious. That's open information. That's common knowledge that she's a leftist. Deborah Boardman's background remains somewhat of a mystery. Deborah Boardman's parents have never been identified by name. The names, first and last, history, work, ethnicity, heritage, citizenship of these people remain hidden. The only thing known publicly about Deborah Boardman's parents is that her mother was of Palestinian descent, or perhaps she's still alive, is of Palestinian descent. But the names of Deborah Boardman's parents are nowhere to be found. Nowhere. Now, the reason that I think that this is worth noting is because in our country, if you think of the most radical individuals in politics, their parents' ideology tells a large part of their story. Think of Ilhan Omar, for example. What did we talk about on the episode last week? Ilhan Omar's father, who came to the United States ostensibly as a refugee, was actually hiding his secret past as a colonel in the Marxist army in Somalia. He was part of the Marxist regime that he claimed to be fleeing. No, he was fleeing because the Marxist regime was overthrown and he was going to be held accountable for his crimes. Ilhan Omar's communism and Marxism, well, was passed on from her father. The same with Zohran Mamdani, this socialist candidate running for mayor in New York City. Look at his parents. His parents, a college professor, a Marxist college professor, Pete Buttigieg. His father, Joseph Buttigieg, the primary translator of Anthony Gramsci's prison notebooks, this blueprint that the left is using to infiltrate and subvert and co-opt our civil institutions to destroy them in order to then topple our governmental institutions to impose Marxism. Pete Buttigieg's father was a communist. I could go on and on here. Roy Singham's father, a huge Marxist, and he passed on that communist ideology to his son. The ideology of the parents, especially people in this of these particular generations, the parents' ideology, they were the ones who were open about being communists. And they passed that ideology on to their children. Their children then just obfuscated it so that they could infiltrate into our institutions to bring that same ideology there undercover. So do I think it's important to identify the parents of Deborah Boardman? Yes, I do. Do I have reason to believe that they're communist? Well, I don't know. Their daughter is certainly a radical leftist who is using her position as a judge to push a very far leftist agenda. And as I said, her mother, whose identity remains hidden, which is strange, is of Palestinian descent. So if you look at the background, the history, what else do we know about Deborah Boardman? She has a college degree. Her undergraduate degree is from Villanova University. And she majored in economics and history with an emphasis on Arab and Islamic studies. So her mother is of Palestinian descent, and she had an emphasis in Arab and Islamic studies in her undergraduate degree. After she graduated from Villanova University, she went on Fulbright scholarship to Jordan in the Middle East. And for a year, she studied trade between Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. What she wrote or what she discovered in her study, again, remains hidden. There are no articles, no published works, no theses, no opinion, editorials, nothing about Deborah Boardman's past opinions or work is available. Again, that's a little unusual in this day and age when there is a digital footprint for just about everyone. And perhaps it's because she has said that her time in Jordan studying trade between Jordan, Israel, and Palestine deepened her understanding of Middle East affairs. Well, what is your understanding of Middle East affairs, Judge Boardman? Could you extrapolate on that? Well, nothing is available publicly except for a law review article written about her by the Federal Bar Association Maryland chapter. It was in a newsletter from the Maryland chapter, and it highlights that Deborah Boardman enjoys travel, that's one of her hobbies. It highlights her travel to various Middle Eastern countries like Egypt and Turkey and Lebanon and Syria and Israel. And the article states, and this is a quote, Judge Boardman's enthusiasm for travel and curiosity about other cultures is more than a hobby. It has a profound impact on her outlook as an attorney and as a judge, and has encouraged her to empathize with parties from all different backgrounds. End quote. Well, as a judge, you're not supposed to empathize with people regardless of their background. You're supposed to be a neutral arbiter of the law. And so you have to wonder exactly what that means when it says her travels to the Middle East have encouraged her to empathize with parties from all different backgrounds. How has that impacted her practice of the law and her rulings or her sentences as a judge on the bench? The law review article goes on to say, to Judge Boardman, law provided an avenue not only to challenge herself intellectually, but also to use her talents to solve real-world problems and fight for social justice. Okay. So Judge Deborah Boardman is a social justice warrior. She is a judicial activist. She views being a judge as an avenue to push her own politics, which is obvious given not only this lenient sentence on Nicholas Roske, the would-be assassin of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, because he's trans, and she hopes his family now, because of the trial, accepts him as their transgender daughter, and she's only going to give him 8 years in prison, even though he really deserves more, because Trump won't allow him, a biological male, to be housed in a women's prison. And, she's worried about him, not the women that he would hurt if he was in a women's prison, but she's worried about him, a man in a man's prison. This is Deborah Boardman. By the way, NBC News has fed into this by calling Nicholas Roske a woman. This was the headline from NBC News, and I don't want to forget to bring this up. This is the headline from them. Just in, they said, on October 3rd, when the sentence came down, a woman who pleaded guilty to attempting to assassinate Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh 3 years ago was sentenced to more than 8 years in prison. That's the headline from NBC News. That is the headline. No. This is not a woman. This is a man identifying as transgender who tried to assassinate Justice Kavanaugh because he was pro-life. NBC News, as they always have been, are despicable lying hacks. And they are partly responsible, by the way, for acts of violence committed by leftists who have spent the last decade imbibing on these lying propaganda headlines. Thank goodness for X, though. This is one of the best community notes that I've ever seen that was populated under this and this fake news NBC headline. It said, context needed. The individual in this case is a biological male, Nicholas Roske, referred to by attorneys as Sophia Roske. However, the case is still under the legal name of Nicholas Roske. And then this is the brutal part. I absolutely love how savage X is. NBC, April 2025, man who had gun and knife, referring to Nicholas Roske. Fast forward to NBC, October 3rd, a woman who pleaded guilty. So what's that? April, May, June, July, August, September, October. Oh, 6 months. 6 months. And NBC News changed the sex of this man. Horrible. Horrible. Now, here's the thing. We can sit here and we can rage about this, or we can do something to actually fix it. And that's the problem that Republicans often suffer from, is we do point out corruption where corruption exists, and we do point out injustice where injustice exists. And yet the left often outplays us in policy, in actually getting things done. And it is time that you and I today change that. And I'm going to give you an exact blueprint for what needs to be done in this particular case. Are you ready? This judge, Deborah Boardman, needs to be impeached. Period. Now, this is not just impeach this judge. This is not just a call into the void. The grounds for the impeachment of a judge like Deborah Boardman there's multiple grounds for this. You can be subject to impeachment for treason. You can be grounds for impeachment. Bribery is grounds for impeachment. These two things, obviously, I don't think that Deborah Boardman committed treason, that, as defined by Article 3. Bribery involves the judge accepting or soliciting something of value. That doesn't apply here. But here's something that certainly applies to Deborah Boardman. High crimes and misdemeanors is grounds for impeachment of a judge. And this is how it's described. It's a broad and sometimes ambiguous category because it encompasses serious abuses of power or misconduct or behavior that undermines the integrity of the judicial office. So again, what does that mean specifically? Well, judicial misconduct specifically means issuing biased rulings or corrupt rulings or rulings that show favoritism to the person or engaging in unethical behavior on the bench. Now, if you thought I was just describing Deborah Boardman and not the grounds for impeachment, you're correct because it's the same. This is quite obvious. A biased ruling, a corrupt ruling, showing favoritism, engaging in unethical behavior on the bench. Abuse of power is another grounds for impeachment, using judicial authority for personal gain or to obstruct justice. Justice is Nicholas Roske going to prison for life, to a male prison for life for the attempted assassination of Brett Kavanaugh, Supreme Court Justice. You are obstructing justice if you are sentencing a lenient sentence because this person identifies as transgender. Obviously, Deborah Boardman qualifies for impeachment. So what's the precedent here? Can this happen? Has this ever happened? How frequently does this happen? What does this even look like if this were to happen? Let's start with the first question. Yes, there is precedent here. Federal judges have been impeached in U.S. history a bunch of times. In fact, 15 federal judges have been impeached by the House of Representatives since 1803. And the way that it works is actually similar to the way that the impeachment of a president works. The House of Representatives would vote by simple majority to impeach a judge, and then it is up to the Senate to either convict or acquit with a 2/3 majority of the senators voting in favor of either acquittal or a guilty verdict here, a conviction. So 15 federal judges have been impeached by the House of Representatives. 8 of them have been convicted and removed by the Senate. And here are the reasons why. It's interesting to look at the history of why these different judges have been impeached and or convicted. In 1803, Judge John Pickering, who was a district judge like Deborah Boardman from New Hampshire, was impeached on the grounds of drunkenness, unlawful rulings, and mental instability. He was both impeached by the House, convicted, and removed by the Senate for judicial incapacity. Unlawful rulings, drunkenness, and mental instability. Samuel Chase is a name that you probably recognize, a very famous judge because he was a Supreme Court Associate Justice. In 1804, he was impeached by the House of Representatives. The grounds were that, or allegedly, partisan bias in his judicial conduct. Partisan bias. He was impeached by the House, although he was acquitted by the sentence. Samuel Chase is the only Supreme Court justice ever to be impeached. And yet, as early as 1804, there's precedent. If there's partisan bias in judicial conduct, it is grounds for impeachment. Fast forward to the modern era. In 1986, a judge from Nevada by the name of Harry Claiborne was impeached for tax evasion. He was impeached by the House. He was removed by the Senate. This one is particularly interesting. In 1989, Alcee Hastings, a judge from the Southern District of Florida, was impeached on perjury and conspiracy to solicit a bribe. He was impeached by the House. He was convicted and removed by the Senate. But here's the thing, and this encapsulates Congress better than any other anecdote I can remember. Hastings, after being impeached as a federal judge because he perjured himself and engaged in conspiracy to solicit a bribe, was later elected as a U.S. congressman to the U.S. House of Representatives because impeachment as a judge does not preclude you from holding office in the people's house. Can you even It's hard to even articulate the audacity of some of these elected officials. Like, yes, I lied to the FBI and to Congress, and I was going to accept a bribe that would pollute and violate our justice system, but please send me as your representative to the people's house. Thank you. Vote for me. The audacity of these people. And yet this is a good illustration of the ethics of the members of Congress, most members of Congress. In 1989, Walter Nixon Jr., he was a district judge from Mississippi. He perjured himself before a grand jury. He was impeached by the House, convicted and removed by the Senate. In 2010, this is the most recent impeachment of a federal judge, G. Thomas Porteous Jr., he was from the Eastern District of Louisiana, a judge down there. His grounds for impeachment was accepting bribes, kickbacks, and lying to the Senate and FBI during his confirmation. He was impeached by the House and convicted and removed by the Senate. There is long-standing precedent of impeaching federal judges. This not only is a thing, it's been done. It's been done in some cases for conduct that you could argue is less severe than what Judge Deborah Boardman has done by legalizing left-wing terrorism, which is what she did. This is not something that was just narrowly applied to the would-be assassin of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. She literally said, if you identify as transgender, I will let you off easy because of that. And here's how the process works. It's not hard. And as soon as we are done here today, I want you to pull up your member of Congress, their website, their contact information, get on the phone, text them, email them, and tell them this is what they need to do. There is one action that they need to take in order to impeach this judge. I'm going to tell you what that process is in 1 second. But first, I want to tell you about Crowd Health. This time of year, insurance companies are hoping that you will sleepwalk into another cycle of overpriced premiums, network headaches, endless fine print. What a nightmare. I literally get agitated just thinking about insurance. It's open enrollment season. And yeah, the double meaning intended, where they're betting that you will not question anything, but you should. Isn't that what we do here on the Liz Wheeler Show? We question everything because there's finally a better way. Crowd Health isn't insurance. I personally like to call it assurance. It's a community of people who've had enough of the old corrupt health insurance system and are taking healthcare into their own hands. For under $100 a month, you get access to prescription discounts, lab testing tools, a network of quality doctors, and a team that negotiates medical bills on your behalf. And if something major happens, you pay the first $500, and then the crowd, that's me and my husband, we're part of Crowd Health, and others step in to help you with the rest. It's actually what healthcare used to feel like before it got hijacked by bureaucracy and bad policy, like Obamacare. Crowd Health members have already saved over $40 million simply by refusing to overpay. You can too. This open enrollment, take your power back. Join Crowd Health to get started today for $99 for your first 3 months using my code, joincrowdhealth.com, code Liz. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code Liz. Mandatory disclaimer, Crowd Health is not insurance, and that's a good thing. I call it assurance. Opt out, take your power back. This is how we actually beat the system. Joincrowdhealth.com, promo code Liz. So the process for judicial impeachment is actually quite simple. In the House of Representatives, articles for impeachment of a federal judge can be introduced by any member. How empowering is that? Let me repeat. Articles of impeachment against a federal judge can be introduced in the House by any member. That means the member that represents you should be hearing from you in about 5 minutes, telling them that you demand articles of impeachment against Judge Deborah Boardman. After articles of impeachment have been introduced in the House, those articles are sent to the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee is tasked with investigating the claims, holding hearings, and then they vote on the articles of impeachment within the committee. If the majority of that committee votes in favor of those articles of impeachment, it advances to the House for a full vote. In the House of Representatives, a vote on impeachment articles for a federal judge requires only a simple majority. A simple majority. Remember, Republicans have a majority in the House right now, so this should be not only possible, it should be without question. After a simple majority vote in the House of Representatives, these articles of impeachment are sent over to the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate then must decide whether to convict or acquit the federal judge on these charges. The Senate, of course, requires a 2/3 majority vote to convict a federal judge. And I know that would be a challenge, given the fact that even Republican senators are a bunch of horrible squishes. But here's the thing. When we get these, whether it's representatives in the House or senators in the Senate, on record, on the issues that matter, on the issues that we care about, on issues that actually allow their voters to see who they are and what they stand for, then it allows us, if they vote incorrectly, to vote them out in the next election cycle. It's when they're vague and they refuse to go on record and we can't really, nail them down on where they stand on the issues that it's hard to run the campaigns against them that actually make a difference to voters. But when they are forced on record, then we can do that. So the current members of the House Judiciary Committee, by the way, there's 25 Republican members and there are 19 Democrat members. And again, any member of the U.S. Congress can introduce articles of impeachment in the House of Representatives, but the 25 Republican members include, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee is Jim Jordan. Darrell Issa is on that committee. Andy Biggs is on that committee. Tom McClintock is on that committee. Thomas Massey's on that committee. Chip Roy's on that committee. A lot. Laurel Lee is on that committee. Wesley Hunt is on that committee. We have Republicans here. Brandon Gill is on that committee. We have a lot of good Republicans on that committee who know how to do the right thing and are there in Congress to pursue justice. And I understand that the ranking Democrat member of the Judiciary Committee, it's Jamie Raskin. He's not exactly there to pursue justice. We have Jerry Nadler on the Democrat side with Eric Swalwell. We have Ted Lieu and Pramila Jayapal. And we have, not really the great ones. We have Jasmine Crockett from the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee. Still, if Shri Thanadar can bring articles of impeachment against President Trump, remember that guy? That real weirdo that brought the impeachment articles against President Trump, and even Democrats were like, dude, come on. Republicans unequivocally can and should bring articles of impeachment against these leftist activist judges. Here's how I view it. Journey back like 10 years ago. There was a moment when you and I recognized that the prosecutors, the district attorneys around the country that weren't prosecuting crimes, we were like, what's wrong with these people? These are prosecutors. Prosecutors are supposed to be like hard against crime. Like, how come all of a sudden these are real softies? And then there was a moment that we realized that this was by design, that George Soros, through his Progressive Prosecutor Project, had deliberately spent money, huge amounts of money on these local DA races, because in local DA races, typically the person who spends the most money is the winner. He had thrown a huge amount of money, way more than the capacity of these candidates to independently fundraise just from, their district. And he had bought these district attorney positions. And he installed, as a result, these quite literally communist prosecutors like Chesa Boudin up in San Francisco. Remember him? He was eventually recalled because his parents were literally members of the Weather Underground. Terrorists. And we realized that these prosecutors, this wasn't an accident. They weren't incompetent. They weren't stupid. That this was a plot against law and justice in our country. That's where we are today with these judges. It has been jarring for us to realize that these nationwide injunctions, that these random federal judges who we've never heard their names of before, never heard of them before, that these random people are acting as the resistance to President Trump. And we're like, what are you doing? Like, how do you have the audacity to do this? Like, haven't you read what your role is and what authority you have? They're not stupid. They're not doing this by accident. It's not one judge going rogue. It is a deliberate plot to first seat these federal judges in positions where they actually can be the resistance, and then to have them act as judicial activists, just like Deborah Boardman. It's not an accident that she looked at Nicholas Roske, who brought a gun and a knife and tried to assassinate Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh after he ruled to overturn Roe v. Wade, that he was ideologically motivated to murder a Supreme Court justice because he didn't like the man's politics. And now he identifies as transgender. And the judge says she hopes that his family accepts him as their transgender daughter. And she's not going to send him to prison that long because she's worried about him because he's not allowed as a man to go in a woman's prison. That's not a coincidence. That's not an accident. It's by design. And we can either sit here and we can rage about it, and it's certainly righteous indignation that fuels our rage. When we see injustice, we know it, we recognize it, or we can do something about it. We have the power in the U.S. Congress, at least for now. We have the capacity to bring articles of impeachment against these judges. We have grounds for impeachment. Biased rulings is grounds for impeachment. Favoritism is grounds for impeachment. This is provable by Justice Deborah Boardman's words. So get your phone out, open up your laptop, pull up the website of your member of Congress, click on their email address, start typing them an email, demand that your member of Congress bring articles of impeachment against Judge Deborah Boardman. Educate them. Educate your member of Congress. Tell them there's a long precedent of impeaching federal judges. This has happened 15 times in our nation's history. 8 times that judge was convicted and removed from the bench. The grounds for impeachment absolutely apply to Deborah Boardman. If we don't stop this, then why would the left stop this? If they're successful in using these judges as the resistance to undermine justice in our country, why wouldn't they keep doing it? So we have a choice. We can recognize that these judges are acting as the resistance, as part of the plot to stop President Trump and undermine our country, or we can just complain about it. And I don't know about you, but I would rather get some of these judges impeached because they deserve it. We are not going to stop until we hold them to account legally using the recourse that's right in front of us. The members of Congress who have sworn an oath to represent what we want in our House, the United States Congress. They owe it to us. And if we raise our voices loud enough, we know they listen and we know they will comply. So do it. That's all we've got for this show. But your task, your challenge is go on X, go on Facebook, go on Instagram, pick up the phone, use your email, tell your member of Congress to bring articles of impeachment against Judge Deborah Boardman. She let this would-be assassin off easy because he's transgender. That is not justice. That's injustice. All right. Make sure you're subscribed to the show. YouTube.com/Liz Wheeler, X.com/Liz_Wheeler, on Spotify. Search The Liz Wheeler Show. Hit subscribe. Give us a 5-star review. I really appreciate everybody who's been doing that. It makes a difference in how many people are able to find the show. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.